Dawn breaks over the airfield. You climb into your fragile plane, every screw and spar a potential death trap. Your comrades wave from the hangars, but today, some will never return. Engines roar, wheels leave the earth. As the plane glides into the sky, one thought grips you. If anything goes wrong up here, it's over. They fought in the skies of World War I without parachutes. Not because none existed, but because High Command refused to give them one. There were 3 reasons for that, and the last one is truly shocking. By 1916, the air war over Europe had entered a new, deadly phase. Dogfights were no longer rare skirmishes. They had become key battles for air superiority. The introduction of the synchronization gear allowed machine guns to fire straight through the propellers without destroying the blades, making close-range aerial combat devastatingly effective. Both sides realized that control of the skies could decide the fate of the front lines, and pilots were pushed into increasingly aggressive engagements. If you want to know more about the synchronization gear and the man behind it, watch our previous video. Being a fighter pilot was one of the most dangerous jobs of the war, but a pilot's greatest fear wasn't being shot. It was being set on fire. Once the engine caught a spark or a fuel tank ruptured, the entire aircraft became a burning torch, and the pilot, strapped in by belts and surrounded by flames, was trapped. Other aviators reported seeing friends fold their arms across their chest and simply jump out of the cockpit, choosing the sky over the fire. And some pilots carried pistols for one final option. All of this while a life-saving device already existed. Because parachutes were already, successfully, in use long before the first airplane ever flew, as far back as the late 15th century, Leonardo da Vinci drew a pyramidal parachute design supported by wooden frames. It was visionary, but never tested in his lifetime. And in 1797, Frenchman André-Jacques Garnerin made the first documented parachute landing from a balloon. While balloons had been used experimentally for military observations since the late 18th century, it wasn't until the early 1900s that balloon crews routinely carried parachutes. During World War I, these parachutes allowed them to survive attacks by artillery or enemy aircraft. Some Zeppelins were also equipped with parachutes for key crew members. By the early 1900s, several parachute models had been refined, tested, and trusted. By the start of World War I, the technology was proven. Yet fighter pilots, climbing into fragile aircraft and facing deadly dogfights, were denied a chance to survive. So why were parachutes denied? The reasons came straight from military command, a mix of practical limits and moral considerations. The first one was that early parachutes were not compact. They weren't backpack-sized, and they weren't designed for fighter cockpits. The only available Allied models were balloonist parachutes, weighing 20 to 25 kilograms and packed in bulky frames. They worked well for balloon crews, who descended slowly and had stable platforms. But in a fast-moving, spinning fighter aircraft, these parachutes were impractical and dangerous. Cockpits had no space, inspections were strict, and even if a pilot had wanted to smuggle one aboard, it would have been nearly impossible. In these fragile, lightweight machines, 20 extra kilograms changed balance, reduced climb rate, and compromised performance. The second reason was reliability. Many Allied commanders believed parachutes were simply not reliable enough. They had been tested from balloons, but using them in a spinning, burning airplane was an entirely different challenge. Lines could tangle, the canopy might not open, the pilot could strike the tail on exit. To ground-based leadership, who rarely, if ever, flew, this was enough to convince them that the devices were not ready for operational use. American ace Doug Campbell later wrote,
"We knew they were being worked on, and we didn't know why we didn't have them."
Another ace, Eddie Rickenbacker, said,
"It was criminal negligence, not equipping us with parachutes for such emergencies."
The technology existed, but leadership didn't trust it. The third reason was the one no one wanted to say out loud, but the one that mattered most. Command feared that if pilots carried parachutes, they might jump too soon. The moment an aircraft caught fire or took a few hits, they might bail out instead of trying to save the machine or complete the mission. To those far from the front lines, a destroyed airplane was worse than a dead pilot. It was a belief rooted in a different era, an era where bravery was measured not in survival, but in how long a man stayed at his post. This fear, that a lifeline would weaken a pilot's resolve, kept parachutes out of Allied cockpits until the final months of the war. In early 1918, everything changed. Germany introduced the Heinecke parachute, the first combat-ready parachute designed specifically for fighter pilots. It was compact, wearable, and functional. It wasn't perfect. Pilots sometimes struck the tail on exit, and canopies occasionally tangled, but it saved lives. German pilots survived mid-air fires, bailed out of collapsing wings, and returned to their squadrons. Allied pilots, watching from across the lines, felt a mix of disbelief and betrayal. One German aviator later said, "It shocked us that the enemy had nothing. It felt like they were being sacrificed." He was right. By the end of the war, the difference was clear. A German pilot whose aircraft caught fire still had a fighting chance. An Allied pilot had none. Across the Western Front, more than 20,000 aircrew on all sides were killed, and thousands of them were fighter pilots. Although many deaths were unavoidable, many others could have been prevented had pilots carried parachutes. By World War II, parachutes had become standard equipment for all aircrew. But the pilots of the First World War flew before the lessons were learned. They flew into a new kind of war with no lifeline and no escape, just the open sky and no way back. Which topic should we cover in our next video? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more war stories.